This is a reading from Ayn Rand, Collectivized Ethics, Virtue of Selfishness, page 97. Science is of value only because it expands, enriches, and protects man's life. It is not of value outside that context. Nothing is of value outside context. And man's life means the single, specific, irreplaceable lives of individual men. The discovery of new is of value to men only when and if they are free to use and enjoy the benefits of the previously known. New discoveries are a potential value to men, but not at the price of sacrificing all of their actual values. A progress extended into infinity, which brings no benefit to anyone, is a monstrous absurdity. And so is the conquest of space on men, when and if it is accomplished by expropriating the labor who are left without means to acquire a pair of shoes. Progress can come only out of men's surplus, that is, from the warsmen, whose ability produces more than their personal consumption requires, those who are intellectually and financially able to venture out in pursuit of the new. Capitalism is the only such men are free to function, and where progress is accompanied, not by full privations, but by a constant rise in the general level of prosperity, of consumption, and of enjoyment of life. It is only to an unreality inside a collectivized brain that human lives are interchangeable, and only such a brain can contemplate as moral or desirable the sacrifice of generations of living men for the alleged benefits of public science, of public industry, of public concerts will bring the unborn. Soviet Russia is the clearest, but not the only, illustration of the achievements of collectivized mentalities. 2 Russians have lived, toiled, and died in misery, waiting for the abundance by their rulers, who pleaded for patience and commanded austerity, while building public industrialization and killing public hope and finance. At first the people starved, while waiting for electric generators and tractors. They are still starving, while waiting for atomic energy and interplanetary travel. That waiting has no end. The profiteers of that wholesale sacrificial slaughter will never be born. Sacrificial animals will merely breed new hordes of sacrificial animals, as the history of all tyrannies has demonstrated, while the unfocused eyes of a brain will stare on, undeterred, and speak of a vision of service to mankind, mixing interchangeably the corpses of the present with the ghosts of the future, but seeing no men. This is a reading from Ayn Rand, The Virtue of Selfishness. This is Collectivized Ethics, page 98. sense of reality in the soul of any milk toast who looks with empty achievements of industrialists and dreams of what beautiful public parks he could create if only everyone's lives, efforts, and resources were turned over to him. Public projects are mausoleums, not always in shape, but always in cost. The next time you encounter one of those public-spirited dreamers who tells you rancorously that some very desirable goals cannot be achieved with everybody's participation, tell him that if he cannot obtain everybody's voluntary participation, his goals had jolly well better remain unachieved, and that men's lives are not his to dispose of. And if you wish, give him the following example of the ideals he advocates. It is medically possible to take the corneas of a man's eyes immediately after his death and transplant them the eyes of a living man who is blind, thus restoring his sight in certain types of blindness. Now, according to collectivized ethics, it's a social problem. Should we wait until a man's death to cut out his eyes? The men need them. Should we regard everybody's eyes as public property and devise a fair method of distribution? Would you advocate cutting out a living man's eye and giving it to a blind man so as to equalize them? No. Then don't struggle any further with questions about public projects in a free society. You know the answer. The principle. January 1963. Page 111, The Monument Builders by Ayn Rand. What had once been an alleged ideal is now a ragged skeleton rattling like a scarecrow in the wind of the whole world, but men lack the courage to glance up and to discover the grinning skull and bloody rags. That skeleton is socialism. 50 years ago, there might have been some excuse, though not justification, for the widespread belief that socialism is a political theory motivated by benevolence and aimed at the achievement of man's well-being. Today, that belief can no longer be regarded as an error. Socialism has been tried in every continent on the globe. In the light of its results, it is time to question the motives of socialism's advocates. The essential characteristic of socialism is the denial of individual rights under socialism. The right to property, which is the right of use and disposal, is vested in society as a whole in the collective, with production and distribution controlled by the state, by the government. Socialism may be established by force, as in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or by vote, as in Nazi National Socialist Germany. The degree of socialization may be total, as in Russia, or partial, This is a reading of Ayn Rand's The Virtue of Selfishness, The Monument Builders, Chapter 11. Socialism may be established by force, as in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or by vote, as in Nazi National Socialist Germany. The degree of socialization may be total as in Russia, or partial as in England. Theoretically, the differences are superficial. They are only a matter of time. The basic principle in all cases is the same. The alleged goals of socialism were the abolition of poverty, the achievement of general prosperity, progress, peace, and human brotherhood. The results have been a terrifying failure. Terrifying. That is, if one's motive is men's welfare. Instead of prosperity, socialism has brought economic paralysis and or collapse to every country that tried it. The degree of socialization has been the degree of disaster. The consequences have varied accordingly. England, once the freest and proudest nation of Europe, has been reduced to the status of a second-rate power and is perishing slowly from hemophilia, losing the best of her economic blood, the middle class and the professions. The able, competent, productive, independent men are leaving by the thousands, migrating to Canada or the United States in search of freedom. They are escaping from the reign of mediocrity, from the mawkish poorhouse where, having sold their rights in exchange for free debts, the inmates are now whining that they'd rather be red than dead. In more fully socialized countries, famine was the start. The insignia announcing socialist rules in Soviet Russia, as in Red China, as in Cuba. In those countries, socialism reduced the people to the unspeakable poverty of the pre-industrial ages, to literal starvation. It has kept them on a stagnant level of misery. No, it is not just temporary, as socialism's apologists have been saying for half a century. After 45 years of government planning, Russia is still unable to solve the problem of feeding her population. As far as superior productivity and speed of economic progress are concerned, the question of any comparisons between capitalism and socialism has been answered once and for all for any honest person by the present difference between West and East Berlin. Instead of peace, socialism has introduced a new kind of gruesome lunacy into international relations, the Cold War, which is a state of chronic war with undeclared periods of peace between wantonly sudden invasions. This is a reading of Ayn Rand, The Virtue of Selfishness, The Monument Builders. Instead of peace, socialism introduced a new kind of gruesome lunacy into international relations. The Cold War, which is a state of chronic war with undeclared periods of peace between wantonly sudden invasions, with Russia seizing 1/3 of the globe, with socialist tribes and nations at one another's throats, with socialist India invading Goa, and communist China invading socialist India. An eloquent sign of the moral corruption of the age is the callous complacency with which most of the socialists and the sympathizers, the liberals, regard the atrocities perpetrated in socialistic countries and accept rule by terror as a way of life. while posturing as advocates of human brotherhood. In the 1930s, they did protest against the Nazi Germany, but apparently it was not an issue of principle, but only the protest of a rival gang fighting for the same territory, because we do not hear their voices any longer. In the name of hate, they condone and accept the following: the abolition of all freedom, all rights, the expropriation of all property, executions without trial, torture chambers, slave labor camps, mass slaughter of countless millions in Soviet Russia, and the bloody horror of East Berlin, including the bullet-riddled bodies of fleeing children. When one observes the desperate efforts made by hundreds of thousands of people struggling to escape from the socialized countries of Europe, to escape over barbed wire fences, under machine gun fire, one can no longer believe that social, in any of its forms, is motivated by benevolence and by the desire to achieve man's welfare. No man of authentic benevolence could evade or ignore so great a horror, so vast a scale. Socialism is not a movement of the people. It is a movement of the intellectuals, originated, led, and controlled by the intellectuals, carried by them out of their stuffy ivory towers into those bloody fields of practice where they unite with the allies and Kitovers, the thugs. What then is the motive of intellectuals? Power lust. Power lust is a manifestation of helplessness, of self-loathing, and the desire for the unearned. The desire for the unearned has two aspects. This is a reading of Ayn Rand's The Virtue of Selfishness, The Monument Builders, page 102. The desire for the unearned has two aspects: the unearned in matter and the unearned in spirit. By spirit, I mean man's consciousness. These two aspects are necessarily interrelated, but a man's desire may be focused predominantly on one or the other. The desire for the unearned in spirit is the more destructive of the two, and the more corrupt. It is a desire for unearned greatness. It is expressed but not defined by the foggy murk of the term prestige. The seekers of unearned material benefits are merely financial parasites, moochers, looters, or criminals who are too limited in number and in mind to be a threat to civilization, until and unless they are realized and legalized by the seekers of unearned greatness. Unearned greatness is so unreal, so neurotic a concept that the wretch who seeks it cannot identify it even to himself. To identify it is to make it impossible. He needs the irrational, undefinable slogans of altruism and collectivism to give a semi-plausible form to his nameless urge and anchor it to reality. To support his own self-deception more than to deceive his victims, the public interest, service to the public, are the means, rules, the swinging pendulums of the power luster's self-hypnosis. Since there is no such entity as the public, since the public is merely a number of individuals, any claimed or implied conflict of interest with private interests means that the interests of some men are to be sacrificed to the interests and wishes of others. Since the concept is so conveniently undefinable, its use rests only on any given ability to proclaim the public, c'est moi, and to maintain at the point of a gun. No such claim has ever been or can ever be maintained without the help of a gun, that is, without physical force. But on the other hand, without that claim, gunmen would remain where they belong, in the underworld, and would not rise to the councils of state to rule the destinies of nations. There are two ways of claiming that the public, c'est moi, by the crude material parasite who clamors for government handouts in the name of a public need and pockets what he has not earned. The other is practiced by his leader, the spiritual parasite, one who derives his illusion of greatness like a fence receiving stolen goods, from the power to dispose of that which he has not earned, and from the mystic view of himself as the embodied voice of the public. This is a reading from Ayn Rand, The Virtue of Selfishness, page 103, The Monument Builders. Of the two, the material parasite is psychologically healthier and closer to reality. At least he eats or wears his loot. But the only source of satisfaction open to the spiritual parasite, his only means to gain prestige, apart from giving orders and spreading terror, is the most wasteful, useless, and meaningless activity of all, the building of public monuments. Greatness is achieved by the productive effort of a man's mind in the pursuit of clearly defined rational goals, but a delusion of grandeur can be served only by the switching, undefinable chimera of a public monument, which is presented as a munificent gift to the victims whose forced labor or extorted money have paid for it, which is dedicated to the service of all and none, owned by all and none, baked at by all and enjoyed by none. This is the ruler's only way to appease his obsession, prestige. Prestige in whose eyes? In anyone. The eyes of his tortured victims, of the beggars in the streets of his kingdom, of the lickers at his court, of the foreign tribes and the rulers beyond the borders. It is to impress all those eyes, the eyes of everyone and no one, that the blood of generation subjects has been spilled and spent. One may see in certain biblical movies a graphic image of the meaning of public monument building, the pyramids, hordes of starved, ragged, emaciated, straining the last effort of their inadequate muscles at the inhuman task of pulling the ropes, that drag large chunks of stone, straining like tortured beasts of burden under the whips of overseers, collapsing on the dying in the desert sands, that a dead pharaoh might lie in an impossibly senseless structure, and thus gain eternal prestige in the eyes of the unborn of future generations. Temples and palaces are the only monuments left of men's civilizations. They were created by the same means and at the same price, a price not justified by the fact that primitive peoples undoubtedly believed, while dying of starvation and exhaustion that the prestige of their tribe, their rulers, was of value to them somehow. Rome fell bankrupted by statist controls and taxation, while its emperors were building colosseums. Louis XIV of France taxed his people in need of indigence, while he built the Palace of Versailles for his contemporary monarchs and for modern tourists to visit. The marble-lined Moscow subway built by the unpaid volunteer labor of Russian workers, including women. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this reading. Go to Chicago Mayor Vote.